Welcome to another episode of the Islamic Dilemma. I am your host, Fadi. In last episode, myself and my guest, Bill Warner, we were discussing the implications of Sharia law on people of other faith. Today, we will continue along the same line, and we will show that Sharia law actually does not look favorably at anyone who does not believe in Islam, even if they were Christians or Jews. And also we are going to show some quotations from Islamic leaders in regards to their view of Sharia law in relationship to the law of other lands. Bill, I'd like to welcome you again.
Delighted to be here again.
Bill, there is something that I wanted to ask. In your study about Sharia law and your research about Sharia law, did you ever come across something that is really surprising that you ask yourself, I cannot believe that Sharia law teaches about such a matter?
The thing that leapt off the pages at me was basically on how to beat a wife. Now,
let me ask you this. We're talking about beating your wife.
Beating your wife,
so
yes.
Sharia law that you have investigated, you studied, gives you detailed analysis of how to beat your wife.
It's a whole procedure. This is not some drunken outrage of anger. There's levels and grades, and it's precisely dictated. Now, I had read Qur'an, Sirah, and Hadith before I read Sharia. But I guess some part of me thought, well, not all of this is going to make it to the law books, but quite to the contrary, it's amplified. It's laid out in very precise ways, the proper manner to beat your wife. It's almost a sacred text on this issue.
Well, I want to point my viewers to this verse from the Quran. It is found in chapter 4, verse 34. We did discuss it before when we dealt with the issue of the view of the Quran on women. And you can go to my blog, the Qur'an Dilemma.com, and also the book, The Qur'an Dilemma, and you can read even extensively about the treatment of women under the teachings of the Quran. This verse is a very troubling verse, even to me. It says, as those women on whose part you fear disloyalty, now it's talking to the husband, and ill conduct. Notice the word is you fear. So there is some sort of a suspicion here. You don't have facts, you don't have supporting evidence, you have your gut feel basically that something might be going wrong. They might be doing something that is called an ill conduct. It says that if you have this fear as a husband, there is a step process. You can admonish them first. Then you can refuse to share a bed with them, and then you can beat them. So,
and the Sharia text amplifies on it. Each of these is just a short phrase here, but in the Sharia text they're amplified, and even suggested conversations are made as to how you will inform her about this.
Now, you know, and I would definitely want to tell my audience that at some point I am going to do an entire episode that is dedicated for wife beating in Islam, and we are going to systematically analyze all of the resources that teaches about this, and also about the proper tools used for this punishment, and all the arguments and on both sides that are for or against. And in fact, I want to point out another thing. If you are to go and look at an English translation of the Quran of this verse, you'll be surprised to see that some of the translators took the liberty, and I say the liberty because it's not found in the Arabic text, and they added the word beat her lightly between two brackets. And I did ask a question before, why beat her at all?
Well, but of course, as you and I both know, the lightly has been added later by people who want to oil the waters and smooth things out.
And that's what I call the sanitized version of Islam. That's the second Islam that you get normally in the West. Because certainly if you were to look at a verse like this as a Westerner or a non-Muslim, this has trouble written all over it.
Well, not only is there trouble in the Quran verse, but as you've pointed out, there actually is an extensive doctrine This is one Quran verse, but when we go to the traditions of Muhammad, we go on and on in developing a complete doctrine of wife beating.
Absolutely. And you know, Bill, I mean, just by looking at this verse, do we sense that there is any kind of an equality between a male and a female?
Well, if there were going to be equality, we would need another verse which states how the wife should beat the husband, but it's not there.
But again, the issue of beating, to me, contradicts the concept
of
of a peaceful religion.
Oh, of course. I'm being ironic when I say that, you know, there should be some husband beating verses. I mean, I'm married. I don't want my wife beating me.
Now, when it comes to, for instance, since we're in a topic of Sharia law, when it comes to the idea of having a male and a female witness in a court of law, you know, what does Islam, for instance, say about that?
In Surah 2, it lays out that a woman's testimony is only half that of a man. And it takes 2 women to equal the testimony of 1 man.
And in fact, I would direct our audience right now to that particular verse that Bill just mentioned. It's found in chapter 2 or Surah 2 of the Quran, verse 282. It says this, "And get 2 witnesses, not of your own men. And if there are not 2 men, then a man and 2 women." Notice, a man and 2 women to substitute for 2 men.
Exactly.
A woman at that time wanted to question the Prophet of Islam about why 2 women and 1 man instead of just 1 man and 1 woman. Do you know what the answer was, Bill?
As I recall, it's, well, one of you will probably forget, and the other one can remind her.
That was one excuse, basically, because in the verse it does go on to say this. But the second troubling answer that he gave her, that, don't you know that women are deficient in their brain and in their intelligence?
Yes.
So, in other words, 1 woman will equal half 1 man. So that's why you, if you're a mathematician, you need 2 halves to equal 1, basically.
Right.
And that's really not the better half in my view.
No.
This is basically, Islam is looking at the woman as the worst half. So in the idea, basically, in terms of the legal testimony, women are not equal.
Right.
I want to show another passage that deals with the lack of equality between a male and a female. We find this in chapter 4, verse 11. It talks about the inheritance, for instance.
Right.
And this says that Allah thus directs you as regards your children's inheritance. To the male, a portion equal to that of 2 females. Once again, we have 1 man will get double the share of a woman, basically. So what we're saying here is the female, in other words, gets half the share of her brother. So I want to illustrate it in a better way. Let's say you have a father, and this father has 1 son and 1 daughter. The father dies, and he has $1 million. The son gets 750, basically, and the daughter gets 250. If I want to use just an illustration here, basically.
Right. But there's something else interesting here. Step back further. A Muslim is told how to write his own will. This is how complete the Sharia is. It covers every aspect, not even a freedom to write your own will in your own way.
So you cannot go and say, well, I want to write a will that I want to give all of my money to my daughter.
No. You do not have that choice. And that's one of the things when you study Sharia and you go on and on through it, the Sharia is like an iron suit that everyone has to fit into. There's no choice.
Well, obviously, the Quran supports everything that we have just talked about. What about other areas in terms of the equality between a man and a woman? Let's talk about marriage, for instance. Can a woman under Sharia law, who is a Muslim woman, marry a non-Muslim man?
No. Now, a Muslim male can marry a Christian or a Jew, but no, the woman is not. She's only to marry another Muslim.
And of course, the idea is the man is superior over her. So notice how Islam looks at it. Islam looks at the even non-Muslim man to be superior over the Muslim woman.
Yes.
That by itself is another text proof that Islam does not provide any equality between a male and a female.
No.
So the other reason, of course, I want to add my insight here as a former Muslim, there is a fear that because the man is the dominant over the woman, if he is a non-Muslim, then he will influence the religion of his children from this Muslim woman.
Right.
In other words, the Muslim woman will have won't have a say-so, basically, over the fact that her kids can follow Islam. The fear is that the male who is the dominant is going to draw his kids away from Islam.
Now, by the way, if a Muslim male marries a Christian woman, is there any chance that the children will be raised as Christian?
Absolutely not. Because, first of all, you inherit the religion and you only need the father to be a Muslim. Then automatically, the fact that your father is a Muslim, the children now are considered to be followers of the religion of Islam. In case of a divorce, of course, the Sharia law court will look favorably into awarding custody of these children to the father simply because he is going to treat them in Islamic culture. They are not going to fear that the children will lose their religion or be taught another religion.
Right.
Even if that means devastating the family, means separation between the children and their mother. You know, other courts that are civic courts will always look for what is the best interest. What is in the best interest of the child? In Islam, what's in the best interest of the child is to become Muslim and stay in Islam, and at the expense of separating families.
All right, let me give you another example. There was a tsunami, and what was the many Muslim parents were killed in the tsunami. There were some Americans who thought, well, we will adopt these children and raise them here in America. No, they could only be adopted if they were a Muslim family, not a Christian family.
Yeah, well, that's true. And what about the idea of divorce?
Well, that's the man's prerogative.
So only the man who is a Muslim can divorce his wife. The wife will, at least according to the pure Sharia law.
A pure Sharia, I don't think it's an option.
I will concur with that. You're not going to find anywhere that Islam gave the woman the freedom to even go and divorce herself. As I mentioned in a previous episode about women and their status in the Qur'an, that a Sharia law judge will be faced with a dilemma if a woman will say, my husband is abusive, because if he wants to follow the law, the Sharia law that is, he's unable to divorce her. Only her husband has that power.
Right.
So what about the idea of a woman who is divorced now and wants to come back to her husband, and let's say Sharia law says he must divorce her no more than 3 times. If he divorces her 3 times, then she cannot go back to him. Is she allowed to go back to him after 3 times?
Only if she marries another man first and they consummate the marriage.
And that's what Sharia law basically teaches. Right. You marry a man, not just on paper.
Right.
We're talking about consummating the marriage.
Exactly.
We're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be very vicious here in my illustration, sexual intercourse with a second man, and then divorce from the second man, and then after that divorce takes effect, then you can go back to your first husband.
And by the way, when I read this, this was one of the, this is not a technical word, wackiest ideas I had ever heard of. This was really like, what? Marry another man, have sex, and now then you can remarry. That was so bizarre to me, and still is.
Now, for the man, how easy is it to divorce a wife? Is it something that will take months and months of court proceedings?
No,
or
as I recall, it's 3 times. And what is the word, talik?
Yeah, talaq, meaning
Talaq.
You're released, basically.
Right.
Now, I want to mention to my viewers that in these days there has been fatwas issued that even you can email and text your wife the divorce if you would just say it 3 times.
Right.
In fact, there has been a case in Pakistan that the husband